What is going on, everybody? It's your boy Malik at Malik's Water Garden. Welcome back to the channel. We're almost at 500 subscribers, so everybody that has subscribed, thank you so much. It really means a lot to me that 500 of you guys have subscribed to this channel already, and in such a short time. So without further ado, let's look at what we're going to talk about today, which is how you can never lose a fish for an untimely death. So fish do die occasionally, and this is a normal occurrence, but what we're going to focus on is what we as fish keepers can do to minimize losses that could be prevented by human error. So in part 1 of this video, I went through some of the things you can do to reduce losses in the process of bringing your fish into your facility, as well as through the quarantine procedures. Now, if you want me to make a separate video, please comment below and let me know to make a separate video about what I do to quarantine my fish. There's a lot of good videos out there online about quarantining as well, which you can check out, which is one of the reasons why I try to focus more on advanced topics, because a lot of the channels that I follow, the fish keeping channels, there's a lot of good information, but it's a lot of basic information. There's not a lot of advanced information for the next level hobbyist. It's good for somebody that's starting up in the industry, in the hobby, but there's not a lot of information available for somebody that has been in the industry for a few years, that already knows how to cycle a tank, that already knows about basic things like quarantine and stuff and how to do that. But other things that are important, that the information is very limited. So that's why one of the main focuses of this channel is to give that type of information that is not commonly available to the hobbyists like you. Now, on the first video, we checked out the 3 main things that you can do to minimize losses in the shipping and shopping process. Now, one is to deal with a reputable fish store or aquarium club or breeders, and 2 is to do your research on what you're getting, what type of fish it is, the requirements, and what to feed it and all that good stuff. And 3, which is I think a very important step, is to quarantine these new fish that you are getting for at least 6 weeks. Now, if you haven't checked that video, please check that out. I will put a link right up here, as well as at the end of this video, so you can check that out. In today's video, we're going to cover things that you can do while your fish are in your own facility. So you've already now brought these fish home. They've been in quarantine for at least 6 weeks. They are doing great, and you are now ready to move these fish into your display tanks. So I'm going to talk about what you can do at that point onwards to ensure that your fish are going to be healthy and successful and live for a long period of time. So we're in front of my redhead Tapaho tank, and we're going to talk about some things that I do to minimize losses in my fish room. I got 6 of these guys at about 2 inches or a little bit less. They were $25 each, so they were not cheap for small fish. I still have all 6. Now, this was over a year and a few months ago, so maybe 14-15 months ago. And they've grown now to full size. I've had all 6 of them in the same tank most of their lives. There's 5 in here right now. The 6th one is in another tank behind, on the other side of the room. And the reason I moved it is because it was getting bullied a little bit by this guy here, which is the tank boss. Oh no, this guy right here. So that's the tank boss, okay? What you can do to minimize losses and to actually eliminate losses, one of the main things is testing your water and staying up on your water changes. Now, I'm going to make these 2 tips a 2-part tip. So part 1, test. Part 2, water change. I like to test all my tanks every day. It's not realistic to test my facility with an API test kit every day, just because that will take me a whole day just to test all the water. Each test takes quite a bit of time, right? What I like to do is use one of these. It's a TDS pen. It gives you a number of your total dissolved solids. Now, I use this thing to just basically check my water every day to see where each tank is at in terms of its water quality. Now, this does not give you a value of how many nitrates is in the tank. It does not give you value of how much ammonia is in the tank. It does not give you a value of a lot of different measurements. It only gives you a value of what the total amount of solids is in the tank, okay? Dissolved solids. Now, nitrates are also measured in parts per million, meaning how many parts of nitrate is there per million parts of water. So when it says 40 ppm, it means 40 parts of nitrate per 1 million parts of water, okay? Now, my tap water is at about 160 parts per million in the spring and about 180 parts per million in the summer and fall and winter months. Now, it's lake water, and that doesn't really change that much through the time I have lived here and kept fish, which is over since 1995, 6, I guess, and in Canada, in Toronto, and the water chemistry has been relatively stable because we get all of our water from a stable giant body of water called Lake Ontario. Now, because this water is quite stable, I can always assure that when I stick this pen into one of my tanks and I get a reading of, let's say, 200 parts per million, about 35 or 30 parts out of that 200 parts per million is nitrates. How do I know that? Because what I put in is clean water from my tap that doesn't have any nitrates. I've tested that water using an API test kit, and I test my tap water about every 2 to 3 months just to have an idea, usually at the beginning of each season, just to have an idea of where that water is to start with. Now, once I put it in the tank, I know what the TDS of the tank is. Once I do the water change, I test the TDS. I like to keep it at as close to my tap water as possible. I always say this: keep your tank water as close to your tap water as possible. Granted, you have good solid water coming out of your tap. If you have bad water, like water that has higher calcium content or higher ammonia content coming out of the tap, obviously this cannot happen and cannot work. But in my case, I am quite lucky. Toronto tap water is quite safe. We don't have a lot of farm chemicals or anything in our tap water, so it is relatively good and clean. So I can get a measurement using this to see where my water is, and as soon as my water goes close to or above 200 parts per million, I do a water change. Why is that? Because I know that past 200 parts per million, my nitrate levels are going to be toxic or reaching toxic levels to my fish. Now, fish in nature can handle nitrates of 160, 180, even 200 parts per million, and even in your tanks. This is not ideal though, because at higher nitrate concentrations, fish will start developing gill issues, also parasites, a lot of bacterial infections, you know, those diseases like that are caused by pathogens, all happen in dirtier or not so clean water. And so you want to maintain a low nitrate level in your tank. 40 parts per million is on average a good amount threshold. So anything above 40 is unsafe, anything below 40 is safe. Okay, now that does not mean that if your nitrate levels go up above 40 parts per million for a day or two and you're behind on your water change for a couple of days, your fish are going to die. It just means that a prolonged period of being in that water is not healthy for the fish. Okay, now test your water, and this is all granted that your tank is completely cycled and established. If your tank is not cycled, this will not work for you, because you will have ammonia and nitrites, and a little bit of ammonia or nitrites can kill your fish, and unlike nitrates, a smaller amount, like 1 or 2 parts per million of nitrites, can actually kill some of your fish, especially your scaleless fish, your sensitive fish. And ammonia can burn their scales and gills, and they could get long-term damage on their bodies as well as death. So definitely want to cycle your tanks first and all that good stuff. A lot of the information I give are going to be somewhat advanced. If you find a lot of this information to be a little bit more advanced, the reason for that is because I find that there's a lot of basic information available on the Fish Room, the YouTube platform, by a lot of good fish keepers. Aquarium Co-op is one of them. LR Brett's, you know, there's a lot of really good fish keepers that I follow myself. I have highlighted them on the channel that have a lot of basic videos that talk about how to cycle the tank, how to set up a tank, what you can do, all this stuff, the basic information. Now, what they seem to not have is the advanced information past the point of just getting your tank set up and going. The information starts to become sparsely less, or considerably less, as it becomes more advanced. So there's not a lot of information, for example, when it comes to these King Tiger Plecos, or there's no information on the L471s, there's no information on Ultim Angels, for example. So these are some of the things I want to cover, because I have been keeping fish for 37 years and breeding fish for almost the same amount of time, and I have experience with a lot of different animals and fish, especially, and keeping and breeding a lot of freshwater fish. Like, I've bred so many fish in my lifetime, so I have a lot of experience and knowledge. So I figured that I wanted to give you guys a bit more advanced, so level 2 and up. Okay, so if you want to find out more about how to cycle a tank and all that stuff, please go to Aquarium Co-op's channel. I'll try to put a link to their channel up here, or any other channels that have this information. I have highlighted all those channels on my channel on the highlighted page, so you can check them out and find out a wealth of information on basic fish keeping stuff. Now, tip number 1, I guess you've already heard, which is to test your water religiously. Okay, every day, every week. And that's why I always recommend one of these, because having this will make sure you test your water. It's so easy. You turn it on, stick it in. Okay. Now, am I concerned about biosecurity when I'm sticking the same pH pen in all my fish tanks? I do have a second pH pen that I use on my quarantine setup. But once my fish do pass quarantine, I am not concerned about biosecurity as much in this part of the facility, because all of these fish have gone through at least 2 months of quarantine before coming into this part of the room. Okay, there's no fish that comes from outside this room into this room that hasn't gone through at least 2 months of quarantine. That is why I'm not too concerned about biosecurity. But if that is a concern for you, you can have one of these pens per tank or per section of tanks, because they're relatively inexpensive. They're about $20 on Amazon. Okay, and they do work quite well. So don't spend too much money on these. Just buy the cheaper ones and buy a couple of them to verify that they are accurate. I can't remember the brand of this. This is actually from, I really like this particular one. I've had this for almost a year now, and works really well for me and gives me accurate readings every time. Okay. The second tip is doing your water changes, which is correlated to tip number 1. After you know what's in the water and how much nitrates are in, as soon as you realize the nitrates are a little bit above 40 parts per million, where it might be a little unsafe for your fish, do a water change. I like to do 50% or more. I actually did a 75-80% water change on this tank yesterday, because the nitrates were about 200, and well, it was 220 parts per million total, so the nitrates were probably about 40-45 parts, and I wanted to bring it down really low. Okay, as close to my tap water as possible. So I did a 75-80% water change in this tank with aged water that has been sitting in my room for over a week. Okay, I do these things so that I don't have to use prime, because prime, I find, adds a little bit of ammonia into the water, which then turns out to become more nitrates, which I don't want in my system, because I like to keep low nitrates as possible for my plecos to breed. Now, water changes are very important. Do a religious. I have 55 aquariums in this room, and majority of these tanks get a weekly water change of at least about 50%. And you know this, obviously, because you've seen my tanks. You see how clean they are. Have a water change schedule, regardless of the quality of your water. Even if it is only 25-30 parts per million in nitrates, I would recommend, if it's the day that you do your water changes, do that water change, because next weekend you might get busy and might be able to do that the weekend after, and it might take 2 more weeks before you do the water change. At that point, your nitrate levels will spike again to unsafer levels for your fish. Now, having said that, fish can tolerate nitrate levels of upwards of 200 parts per million. I have seen fish in tanks, even in my own tanks, where they have been neglected throughout a summer where I've been working or something, a specific tank that didn't get a water change because I missed it somehow. 450 parts per million of total dissolved solids. Nitrates are over 200, and the fish are fine. But not all fish are going to be fine. They're going to develop internal bacterial issues. There's going to be issues that you might not physically see looking at the fish. So, and also, although some of the fish might be able to tolerate it, most of your fish will not be. So what you are going to start seeing is those fish will have compromised immune systems and stuff like that, and going forward they will occasionally die because of that stress that you have put them through. So to avoid all these, what you can do is really do your water changes religiously, and maintain a clean environment for your fish. You gotta understand, these animals are gonna be using the bathroom every second of every day in this body of water. They're gonna take their pees and their poos and all the ammonia that's coming out of their gills through their metabolic functions are all gonna be accumulating in this 40 gallons of water. Now imagine if you were in a room where you had to poo and pee. Even if your poo and pee were in a bucket, it's gonna start smelling real bad within a few days, right? Same thing. This is not ideal for your fish to be in long term. So you really need to change the water out. Your filter doesn't really take the poo and the pee out of the water. It just converts into chemicals that are less harmful for your fish. So you have a few days leeway to do your water change. But realistically, a weekly or bi-weekly water change is a must. And I like to do weekly water changes because I like to stay in my routine. If I lose my routine, then I get lazy and I forget to do my water changes. I try to put it off till the next day or whatever. So there's no exceptions. Every Saturday and Sunday, I am doing water changes in all my fish room. And usually Friday night I start, and through the Saturday and Sunday, I'm doing all these water changes. That's why you're seeing all the tanks are always clean and always pristine and always looking nice. And I have OCD, so I like doing that. So that's tip number 2. So tip 1 and 2, do your water test using an API test kit, as well as one of these guys, a TDS meter for easier, quicker results on a general idea of where your water is, and do your water changes religiously. Okay? And tip number 3, I believe, is going to correlate to the first bit of this video where we talked about doing your research, is to feed your fish an appropriate diet. Okay? You have to find out what these animals are supposed to be eating, figure out what other people are feeding them in general, ask from a variety of people, and develop a diet that you can easily find and source in your neighborhood, like through your online retailers or your local pet store or whatever, that can be fed to your fish, that they accept readily, and also is highly nutritious for the fish, and is balanced and designed for that particular species of fish. Now, by doing this, you are going to reduce your losses very drastically. By feeding an adequate diet, your fish are going to be healthy. They're not going to be susceptible to diseases. They're not going to have bacterial infections. They're not going to have digestive issues. They're not going to die an untimely death. They're not going to be able to, they're going to be more stronger because their immune system is high and strong. So anytime they do get stressed, they have a good chance of recovering or whatever because their immune system is high up there. Now, if you're feeding them just flake food or just basic food that has very low nutrition, your fish are going to be weak already. So anytime they are attacked by a virus or something comes into their system that is going to affect them negatively, they will be susceptible to that disease, and then or they could succumb to it and die. So that's something to really consider, is to maintain healthy fish from the start, and feeding them a balanced and a healthy diet specifically designed for that particular type of fish is definitely going to help you with this. Okay, I have several videos on what I feed my fish, so I highly recommend you check those out. I'll put links to that at the end of this video. Now, tip number 4 is going to be a bonus tip, I believe, is that if you are doing all these other things, there's still things you can do for your fish tank. And this is a very important thing, I believe, is to monitor your fish tank daily. Now, what do I mean by that? You feed your tank, you come in, you look in, you put food in. That is not monitoring your tank. That is feeding your tank. You are doing your water changes. You spend an hour, half an hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours on a particular tank, whatever it is. That is not also monitoring your tank. Monitoring your tank is after you've done those things. Pull up a chair, sit in front of the tank, get a glass of wine or a bottle of beer if you're over 19 or 21, depending on the state you're living in, and watch your fish like you would be watching TV. Okay? Now, by doing this, you will start realizing all the different things that's going on in your tank when you are not looking in there with in this mode. I call it my observation mode. So I go into like a relaxed atmosphere, pretty much. Open a beer, sit down in front of my tanks after I fed everybody. Usually where I'm sitting right now, but more where the camera is. And I look at each tank very calmly, and spend a half an hour, 45 minutes just looking at all the fish in this area. I do the same thing in the other side of the room. I do this every couple of days just to get an idea of where everybody is and how everybody's doing. By doing this, I get to notice if one particular fish has been bullied. Like for example, I have over 30 gold laser cories in the tank behind me here, on the other side or in front of me. And in that tank, there was actually a gold laser that passed away a few days ago. And it was I guess it was the lowest fish on the pecking order, so it wasn't getting as much food, and it was very skinny, and it was being pushed around by the blue ram that was in the tank, and all that stuff. I noticed it a few days ago, and by that time it was a little bit too late for that particular fish. I did move it to another tank, and I did pass away. It did cost me about $20 to buy these, right? So it wasn't cheap. I don't think that particular one was one I bought. I think that's one of the fish that was born in my facility, but they are not cheap. So a gold laser is an expensive Coridora. I don't want to lose a $20 fish for something that I can't prevent. So by paying attention now, what I did realize is that the tank is a little overcrowded, and I do have to take out all the smaller ones and move them into a grow-out tank, and I have to take out all the larger ones and put them back into a breeding tank for the summer so they can start producing again. Now, same thing here. I actually had to remove one of the Geophagus yesterday because this guy, the tank boss, had been biting that Geophagus on the base of his pectoral fin. So it was biting at this particular spot continuously. I didn't notice it for over a week. All I was noticing is just the posturing, and the other fish looked fine. His fins were fine, his tail was fine, there was no shredded tails. So there's no sign from the appearance of looking just like superficially that the fish is being bullied. But if you were to spend some time and look, you will definitely, I noticed yesterday that the reason the fish had this like almost red lesion, or started to get a red lesion, was because this guy kept biting the exact same spot. So, and also that's another part of this tip, I believe, is check your tank at night. I believe that that's very important when the lights are off, and it doesn't matter what time of day it is. When the lights are off and the fish are doing whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing when it's dark, check your tank. That's when I found out these. I find a lot of spawning activity at night. I found L345 that I'll put a little clip here for you guys to see. In my tank, actually walking by the tank when the lights were off, I think the other day. And so you do find a lot of interesting things about your fish, and also it's a good way to monitor your health to look at the tanks at nighttime as well. Now, I'm going to cut this video at this point and say these are some of the tips that I can think of that are more important. There are going to be other tips. I will make another video of part 3, I guess, of this series in another couple of days. If you do want me to make a next video about what you can do to reduce losses in your fish room, please comment below and let me know that you want me to make a third part to this video, because I do have more tips. I just don't want to bore you guys with repeated content or things that you might already know, or basic stuff that is already available online. Some of these stuff can seem a little basic, like doing your water changes, but you would be surprised how many people actually don't do their water changes on time, or forget to do their water changes. And I used to be one of those people. And now my new system is, aside from the test, is that I have specific dates in the week that I do my water changes. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday are my water change days. And regardless of what's going on in the world or in my personal life, I have to do my water changes on those 3 days. And all the tanks, except for the shrimp tanks, get a water change. The shrimp tanks get a water change usually once every 3 to 4 weeks because they don't accumulate as much nitrates. and those I do like depending on my schedule, usually midweek. So I will have a midweek water change day, which is when I will do some of those and take care of those tanks. But all the bigger tanks, as well as all the breeding tanks, all get a water change on between Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, by doing that, I have put myself into this routine where I can't really break it. It only takes you 2 to 3 weeks to get yourself into a routine. So once you're in that routine, you can't break the routine. So test, water change. The next thing is feed an adequate and a designed diet for that particular species, a high quality diet, so that your fish is getting the optimal nutrition. And the third tip is check your tanks religiously and monitor, and also check them at night. So those are my 4 tips on what you can do to keep your fish from dying an untimely death once you do have them in your facility and they have passed quarantine. Now, there are 3 tips that I have highlighted that you can do before you even bring the fish into your facility. So I highly recommend you check those 3 out, as well as subscribe to the channel and hit that notification icon so you get updated when part 3 of this video, as well as many other videos like this, get uploaded. As always, I thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, please comment below and let me know, and I will gladly oblige and make either comment and answer your questions, or make a specific video if it's something that requires me to make an entire video about. As always, thank you so much. I love you all. Hope you guys have an amazing day. God bless.